She scrubbed the cafe floor so fast the mop splashed dirty water against the legs of polished chairs. The owner passed by, her voice sharp enough to slice through the hum of conversation. "Dreamers don't last long here." Before the sting of the words could fade, the door swung open, letting in a rush of cold air and a tall man in a dark coat. He ordered coffee, sat in the far corner, and fixed his gaze on her. It wasn't curious or casual, it was the kind of stare that felt like it was weighing her, measuring something unseen. Minutes passed. His coffee cooled untouched. He didn't look away. Every movement she made under that gaze felt like a test she hadn't prepared for. She tried to focus on the mop, on the swirl of gray water in the bucket, but the heat in the back of her neck told her he was still watching. Customers came and went, the bell above the door chiming, but his presence stayed anchored in that corner like a shadow that refused to move. Her breath shortened. Was he judging her like everyone else, or had he seen something that no one else bothered to look for? She caught herself glancing at him, once, twice, then again, waiting for some shift, some reason. Nothing. Then, as she bent to wring out the mop, movement caught her eye. A small folded card slid across the floor, stopping just short of her shoe. She froze. The card hadn't been there a moment ago. No one else reacted. Conversations buzzed, cups clinked, steam hissed from the espresso machine. She crouched, fingers damp from the mop water, and picked it up. The paper was thick, expensive. No logo, no name, just 5 handwritten words in firm black ink: "You don't belong in here." Her head snapped up. The man was still watching. And now, for the first time, he smiled, not with warmth, not with pity, but with the quiet certainty of someone who just confirmed a suspicion. The mop dripped onto the tiles, each drop landing with the precision of a ticking clock. She stood frozen, her mind torn between throwing the card away and demanding an explanation. Before she could move, the bell above the door chimed. The rush of cold air swept through the cafe again, but this time it carried him out into the street. She turned the card over. On the back, an address, scrawled, not printed, in a part of the city she'd only ever heard in whispered warnings. She tightened her grip until the edges bit into her skin. Logic screamed to toss it into the trash, to forget the look in his eyes. But her heartbeat was already quickening with a different truth: she wouldn't. The address on the back of the card looped through her mind like a song she couldn't turn off. She tucked it deep into her apron pocket, but even with her hands back on the mop, the thought pulsed under her skin. The corner of the paper seemed to burn against her thigh as if it knew she wouldn't leave it there for long. By closing time, the cafe was nearly empty. She wiped down the last table, her body on autopilot while her mind played dangerous what-ifs. What was at that address? Why give it to her without a word? And how could a stranger walk into her life, drop 5 cryptic words, and leave her like this, half intrigued, half afraid? She told herself to forget it. People like him didn't notice people like her without wanting something in return. Still, when she stepped outside into the chill night, the card was already in her hand. The city around her was slick with rain, streetlights reflecting off the wet pavement in fractured halos. She traced the letters of the address with her thumb. The sound of footsteps behind her snapped her out of her trance. Quick, deliberate. She turned, but the street was empty, only the ripple of water in the gutter and the low hiss of a passing bus. She shoved the card into her jacket and walked faster. By the time she reached her apartment, her pulse had steadied, but not her thoughts. She locked the door, dropped her bag, and sat at the small kitchen table. The card lay in the center, daring her. It was only an address, yet it felt like a door she'd been circling for years without realizing. She didn't sleep. At 3 a.m., she made tea and stared out the window at the flicker of a lone street lamp. She imagined knocking on that door tomorrow, imagined what might be inside: an opportunity, a trap, or nothing at all. When dawn broke, pale and uncertain, she had made her choice. She would go. But as she folded the card back into her pocket, something outside caught her eye, a black car idling across the street. Its windows were tinted, its engine barely audible. She watched for a full minute, waiting for it to drive away. It didn't. And when she finally stepped back from the window, she swore she saw the faint glow of a phone screen inside, and the shape of someone watching her. She stood frozen at the window, heart pounding hard enough to make her ribs ache. The black car didn't move. Whoever was inside wasn't trying to hide, they wanted her to see. The rain-slick street shimmered between them like a thin, dangerous line, and she had the unsettling sense that crossing it, in either direction, would change everything. Finally, the car pulled away, not with a screech, not in a hurry, just a slow, deliberate glide down the block until it vanished. The quiet it left behind was somehow louder. She backed away from the glass, locked the window latch, and tried to convince herself it had been nothing. By morning, she'd settled on a plan. She'd go to the address on the card, but not directly. She'd take the long route, switch buses, and walk the last stretch. If someone was watching her, they wouldn't be able to follow easily. The city was already bustling when she stepped outside, the card tucked in her shoe like a hidden coin. Her jacket collar was turned up, her eyes scanning every reflection in shop windows. At each bus stop, she checked for the black car. Nothing. But the absence didn't make her feel safer, just watched from a greater distance. The address led her into a part of the city she'd never visited. The buildings here were tall but tired, their brickwork darkened by decades of rain and smoke. She passed shuttered storefronts, alleys that smelled of rust, and graffiti that seemed to warn rather than decorate. Finally, she reached it, a heavy metal door set into a wall with no sign, no number, only the faint outline of where paint had once been scraped away. She hesitated, the hum of the street receding into a silence that felt staged. Before she could knock, the door opened. A man she'd never seen stood there, mid-40s, sharp suit, eyes that assessed her the way the strangers had in the cafe. He didn't ask her name, didn't even greet her. He just stepped aside and said, "You're late." Inside, the air was warm and dim, smelling faintly of coffee and something metallic. The space looked nothing like she'd imagined, half office, half workshop, with long tables covered in papers, circuit boards, and machines she couldn't name. A low murmur of voices came from somewhere deeper in the building. And then she saw him, the man from the cafe, leaning casually against a workbench, arms crossed. That same look was in his eyes, the one that had unsettled her before, as though he already knew every move she'd make next. "You came," he said, and his tone made it sound less like an observation and more like the closing of a door behind her. Her first instinct was to turn around and leave, but the metal door closed behind her with a weighty clang, the sound echoing through the space like a lock snapping shut. The man from the cafe didn't move toward her, yet somehow the distance between them felt smaller, pressing in. "You didn't tell me why I should," she said, forcing her voice to stay level. "You wouldn't have come if I had," he replied. "You needed to decide without knowing the terms. That's how I know you might survive this." She frowned, pulse quickening. "Survive what?" Instead of answering, he walked toward one of the tables, picked up a sealed envelope, and slid it across the workbench toward her. "Open it." The paper was thick, expensive, like the card. Inside was a photograph, not of him, not of this place, but of her. She was in her cafe uniform, caught mid-step as she carried a tray of mugs. The angle was low, as though the picture had been taken from a parked car. Her stomach dropped. "Where did you get this?" "That's the wrong question," he said, watching her reaction closely. "The right question is who else has it?" From the shadows at the far end of the room, a second figure emerged, a woman in her 30s, dressed in black, her expression unreadable. She set a thin folder on the table next to the photo. "They've been keeping tabs on you for months," she said. "Why?" The word came out more like a demand than a question. "Because," the man said, stepping closer now, you have something they can't buy, and that makes you dangerous. The woman in black added, they're going to offer you a deal. When you refuse, they'll try to ruin you. That's their pattern. It's how they keep the world clean of people like you. The sound of machinery hummed somewhere deeper in the building, a steady undercurrent to his words. She wanted to laugh, to tell them they had the wrong person. She was nobody. She cleaned floors in a cafe, lived in a cramped apartment, counted every coin before buying groceries. But the photo burned in her hands, undeniable proof that someone had been watching. Why me? She whispered. Because, he said, you're already on their list. You just don't know what for yet. Before she could reply, the heavy metal door slammed open again, flooding the room with daylight, and silhouetting two figures she didn't recognize. The sudden blast of daylight carved the space into stark contrasts, shadows stretched long across the floor, slicing through the warm dimness like blades. The two silhouettes in the doorway didn't move, didn't speak. They just stood there, blocking the exit, the light at their backs making their faces unreadable. Every instinct in her body screamed to run, but there was nowhere to go. The man from the cafe stepped between her and the door, his voice calm but carrying a warning edge. You're early, he said. One of the newcomers, a tall, lean figure in a gray coat, took a step forward. We don't like waiting. His tone was casual, but the kind of casual that hides something sharp underneath. The man from the cafe didn't flinch. This isn't your meeting. Everything concerning her, the gray coat said, flicking his gaze toward her, is our meeting. Her mouth went dry. I don't even know who you are. The other newcomer, broader and quieter, finally spoke. You don't need to. You just need to come with us. Right now. The woman in black moved, stepping subtly closer to her. Her voice was low enough that only she could hear. If you leave with them, you won't be seen again, at least, not in the way you are now. The room seemed to shrink. She felt the eyes of every person on her, weighing, waiting. Her pulse thudded in her ears, but over it she caught the faintest sound from outside, an engine idling. The memory of the black car flashed in her mind. Gray coat took another step forward, his polished shoes silent on the concrete floor. You have something that belongs to us, he said. And whether you know it or not, you've already agreed to give it back. I don't have anything of yours, she shot back, the words surprising her with their firmness. A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. You will. The man from the cafe suddenly shifted, his stance hardening. You've made your point. Now leave. The two strangers exchanged a glance, and for a moment it seemed they might push back. Then Gray Coat stepped back into the light, the broader man following. But before they disappeared, he turned his head slightly toward her. 48 hours, he said. That's all you've got. The metal door closed again, sealing the daylight out. The hum of machinery filled the silence they left behind, but it didn't feel like normal noise anymore, it felt like a clock, ticking down towards something she couldn't yet see. She turned to the man from the cafe, her voice barely above a whisper. What happens in 48 hours? He didn't answer. He only picked up the folder from the table and slid it toward her. Read. Then decide whether you're ready to fight for your life. Her fingers hesitated on the folder, the cardboard warm as if it had been sitting under a light for hours. She opened it slowly, the paper inside whispering against her skin. The first page was a grainy printout of another photograph, her again, but this time not in the cafe. She was standing outside her apartment, one hand on the door, her face turned slightly as if she just sensed someone watching. The next page was worse. It was a list, her name, address, birthday, shifts at work, even the routes she took when she walked home. In the margins were notes written in shorthand she couldn't understand, but the dates were recent. 2 days ago. Yesterday. This morning. Her stomach twisted. They've been following me. They've been building a profile, the woman in black corrected. Following is too small a word for it. They're cataloging you. She flipped to the next page and froze. There was a blurry shot of a notebook she recognized instantly, her own, the one she kept hidden under her bed. Its pages were filled with sketches and ideas she'd never shown anyone, plans that felt too fragile to let out into the world. She looked up sharply. How did they? They're already inside your life, the man from the cafe interrupted. That's why you're here. Because once they move from watching to acting, you'll have no way to stop them. Her chest felt tight, her breaths shallow. Why me? I clean floors. I serve coffee. I'm nobody. He leaned forward, eyes locking onto hers. You have an idea that can't be bought, and you've been foolish enough to put it on paper. That makes you valuable. And dangerous. The words hung heavy in the air. She didn't want to believe him, but the folder in her hands made denial impossible. The woman in black placed a phone on the table, its screen already lit with a countdown timer, 47 hours, 58 minutes. This, she said, is how long you have to decide who you are going to trust. Before she could speak, the hum of the machinery deepened, almost like a growl. Somewhere in the building, a door slammed. Footsteps, fast, heavy, echoed through the hall. The man from the cafe stood abruptly. They're back. And this time, the look in his eyes told her there would be no polite warnings, no 48 hours, only whatever happened next. The footsteps drew closer, pounding against the concrete like a drumbeat that made her ribs ache. The woman in black snapped the folder shut and shoved it into her hands. Keep it with you. Don't let it out of your sight. The man from the cafe moved to the far wall and pressed something she couldn't see. A panel slid open, revealing a narrow, dimly lit passage. Go, he ordered. She froze. Where does it lead? Somewhere they won't follow. Not yet. The pounding in the hallway stopped. Silence stretched for 3 heartbeats, then the crash of the metal door exploding inward shattered it. 2 shapes filled the doorway again, but this time they didn't hesitate. Gray coat stepped in, his gaze sweeping the room, landing on her. The other man flanked him, holding something small and metallic that caught the light. You're making this harder than it needs to be, Gray coat said, almost lazily. The man from the cafe stepped in front of her, his stance rigid. She's not going with you. The tension in the air was so thick she could feel it against her skin. Her mind screamed at her to move, but her legs felt bolted to the floor. The woman in black shoved her toward the open panel. Now! Her feet finally obeyed, carrying her into the narrow passage. The air inside was stale and cold, the light flickering weakly. She heard shouts behind her, voices overlapping, the scrape of something heavy across the floor, then a single sharp sound that might have been a gunshot or a door slamming shut. She ran until the passage ended at a small metal hatch. For a moment, she hesitated, her hand hovering over the latch, her breath ragged. On the other side could be safety, or a trap set by the same people she was running from. A muffled voice came from somewhere behind the hatch, low and urgent. If you open this, you don't get to go back. Her pulse pounded in her ears. She turned the latch. The hatch swung open to reveal not an alley, not the street, but a cavernous, dim warehouse lined with unmarked crates and the faint smell of oil. And in the center, under a single hanging bulb, stood the black car. Engine running. Driver's door open. No one in sight. The low rumble of the idling engine filled the warehouse, its steady rhythm almost hypnotic. She stepped inside, the metal hatch clicking shut behind her with a finality that sent a shiver down her spine. The bulb above swayed gently, throwing the shadows of the crates into long, shifting shapes that seemed to lean toward her. She approached the car slowly, each step echoing on the concrete floor. The driver's seat was empty, the black leather glistening faintly under the light. On the passenger seat lay a single object, a small, plain envelope, sealed and unmarked. She hesitated, glancing over her shoulder. The warehouse was silent, but the silence felt unnatural, as if the entire building was holding its breath. Reaching through the open door, she picked up the envelope. It was heavier than it looked. Tearing it open, she found a stack of photographs. Her face stared back from every one of them. Some were from the cafe, some from her apartment building, others in places she didn't even remember being. But the last photograph made her knees weaken. It showed her here, in this warehouse, standing next to the black car. Only the timestamp in the corner said the photo had been taken 3 minutes from now. Her breath caught. She looked instinctively toward the shadows. A faint scuff of a shoe against concrete came from behind one of the larger crates. She stepped back from the car, the photographs slipping from her hand, fluttering to the floor. "Right on time," a voice said from the darkness. It wasn't Gray Coat. It was deeper, steadier, someone she hadn't heard before. A figure emerged slowly, dressed in a dark jacket, his face half hidden under the brim of a cap. He stopped just outside the circle of light, his hands visible and empty. "You have something," he said evenly, "that both of them want. But neither of them should have it." Her pulse thundered. "Both of who?" "The man who sent you here," the stranger said, tilting his head toward the hatch she'd come through. "And the man who's been following you." She wanted to demand answers, but the stranger raised a hand, stopping her. "You've got about 90 seconds before one of them comes through that door. If you want to live, get in the car now." The sound of a distant door slamming echoed through the warehouse. She looked at the open driver's seat, then back at the stranger. "Who are you?" she asked. "I'm the only one who doesn't plan to own you," he said. "Yet." Her fingers hovered on the edge of the car door. 90 seconds. Maybe less now. The air in the warehouse felt denser, the shadows heavier, as if the walls themselves were bracing for whatever was about to happen. She slid into the driver's seat, the smell of leather and something faintly chemical surrounding her. The stranger leaned in just enough for their eyes to meet. "When you hit the ignition, don't stop. No matter who steps in your way." The words landed like a command she didn't want to obey. "Where am I going?" "Somewhere they won't follow," he said, his tone unreadable. "For a while." She gripped the steering wheel, its leather cool against her palms, and pressed the start button. The engine's growl filled the warehouse, louder than before, vibrating through her chest. A metallic crash rang out from the far side of the building. Someone had forced another door open. Footsteps echoed, quick and purposeful, bouncing off the walls. The stranger stepped back, melting into the shadows. "Go." Her foot slammed down on the accelerator. The car surged forward, tires screaming against the polished concrete. She swerved between crates, the hanging bulb overhead spinning wildly in her rearview mirror. A figure appeared ahead, tall, coat flaring as he moved into her path. For a split second she thought it was Gray Coat, but as the headlights caught his face, her stomach turned. It was the man from the cafe. His eyes locked on hers, calm even as the car hurtled toward him. He didn't move. At the last possible moment, she jerked the wheel. The car clipped the edge of a crate, splinters exploding into the air, and shot past him toward the yawning exit. Cold night air slammed into her as she burst out onto the street. The tires caught wet asphalt, skidding before gripping again. In the rearview mirror, she saw him still standing in the warehouse doorway, watching her go, no anger, no fear, just that same look of recognition he'd given her the first time. And then he raised his hand. Not in a wave. In a signal. 2 black headlights flared to life down the street ahead of her. Waiting. Her grip on the wheel tightened until her knuckles ached. The 2 headlights ahead grew brighter, sharper, splitting into the unmistakable outline of another black car, sleek, low, and pointed straight at her. There was no time to think. She spun the wheel hard right, the tires shrieking as the car fishtailed onto a narrow side street. The buildings on either side blurred into streaks of shadow and neon. Somewhere behind, the other engine roared to life, following. Every turn she made, they made too. She could feel their presence closing in, the pressure building like a vice. The stranger's voice echoed in her mind, "Don't stop. No matter who steps in your way." The street ahead narrowed, funneling into an underpass. The walls pressed in, graffiti rushing past her peripheral vision. She risked a glance in the rearview mirror. Now there were two sets of headlights behind her. Her chest burned with the effort to breathe. She had no plan, no map, only the desperate knowledge that slowing down would end everything. The underpass spat her out into an open industrial yard, rows of cargo containers stacked like a steel labyrinth. She swerved between them, the sound of pursuit echoing off the metal. Then, without warning, a figure stepped out from between two containers, directly into her path. She slammed the brakes, the tires screaming, the car skidding to a stop just inches from him. It was the stranger from the warehouse. He walked to her door, calm despite the distant howl of engines growing nearer. "You lasted longer than I thought," he said, opening the door. "Now comes the part where you decide who you're going to be." "What if I don't choose?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Then," he said, glancing over his shoulder as the headlights swept into the yard, "someone else will choose for you." The engines roared closer, bouncing off the steel walls. He held out his hand. "Come with me, and you might keep your life. Stay, and you'll lose it, one way or another." For a split second, she thought she saw movement on top of the containers, a silhouette, watching. It could have been Gray Coat. It could have been the man from the cafe. Or it could have been someone she hadn't met yet. Her hand hovered over his. The engines were almost on top of them. And she still hadn't decided.